the name Jerwood has been absolutely central to British artistic life for as long as I can remember, in all different spheres. And it was only when I went to Hastings to visit some friends and they took me around the gallery that I realised that part of what Jerwood meant was, amazingly enough, one of my favourite fields of art, and indeed the one which, in a very small way, I collect myself, which is 20th century British art, which used to be called modern British art, but it's changed its name. And going round the Hastings Gallery and seeing the paintings that I loved in a fantastic setting, because it is a tremendous gallery in an incredible location, was a real thrill for me. And later on, I discovered that for different reasons, that collection was going to be leaving the gallery. And of course, I thought, how do I get my hands on this? And so I asked Lisa what we should do, and she said, well, by hook or by crook, you need to talk to Alan Grieve. Now, Alan has hidden his light somewhat under a bushel behind the name Jerwood, but to my enormous pleasure, he has chosen to come along today, and I'm going to talk to him about some of the things in this really astonishing collection. And Alan, it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's jolly nice of you to say those things. I'm sure John Jerwood, who left us in 1991, would be pretty proud to be here. For my part, it's been fascinating to meet up with old friends, and by that I mean pictures, which I haven't seen for years and years and years.
The Jerwood has, as I say, more or less defined the world of art in Britain for the last few decades. Why art? I mean, this was a man who presumably could have chosen to give his money to anything.
Well, I think there's I'll try and make it a quick answer. He was interested in education, and he gave large sums of money, something in excess of £7 million before his life and immediately after his life, to Oakham School in Rutland, where his family had been. And I believe, rightly or wrongly, that education includes culture. Mm-hmm. And I believe culture includes art. Mm-hmm. And it was a very short step. John was interested in literature and music, mm-hmm. But he was also intensely interested in the education of young people.
Right.
And so to try and give this some physical recognition, when we had moved into our building in Bloomsbury, about 4 years after his death, 3 or 4 years after his death, we started hanging pictures on the wall, as is well known. Mm. And when we'd hung a few of these paintings that are in this gallery at this time, people were saying to us, because we had quite an active life, we had a big board table, so we had inevitably meetings of people. By the way, we had no agenda and no minutes. And they said to me, what are you going to do with all these paintings? Because you can't just go on hanging them here because nobody sees them. And we were put under pressure by the art world not to buy nice, good, interesting, unusual pictures, but to show them. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really when we got on the slide, which led to Hastings, as you said.
Well, I wouldn't call it a slide, I'd call it a steady ascent. So the first painting that you bought was,
well, it was
Ditchling, Frank Brangwyn.
It's a Brangwyn, yes.
Why? Why start there?
I think I had a sort of mentor, as that's a current word. Mm. Who is your mentor? Everybody asks famous people. My mentor was a fellow called Peter Wakefield,
okay.
Who you may even have met, William. No,
I don't
he was a
think
diplomat, so. And he was he was chairman of several art institutions in his time, and he was a good judge of paintings and had paintings, and he helped me buy in the first year or two when I didn't have much courage. Mm-hmm. And The other person who helped me was the director of Kettles in Cambridge, Michael Harrison.
Okay.
And Michael Harrison sadly died early, and so Peter Wakefield and Michael Harrison helped me enormously.
And how did that relationship work? Because I had a similar person, Mark Glazebrook, who was a dealer. And I mean, I basically got on very well with Mark. You know, he was an outrageous sort of bon vivant and very amusing. And so there was a personal relationship. And I would decide I liked something, and then he would say, "Oh, I don't like that much, it's too small," or something like that.
Yes, I've had a bit of that.
How did your relationship work?
Yes,
with?
yes. The other one you get is it has no wall power.
Yes, I don't remember that, but I'm sure that was said.
I mean, you can, when you put paintings as there are in this room, of course, one smothers another.
Yeah, well, that's true. Actually.
So unless you hang a painting alone, I've never discussed this with Laura Wardle, but unless you hang a painting solely on a wall, you're not going to get the effect.
Yes.
And so the hang is actually more important than I realised.
I think you're absolutely right. And some years ago, Nick Penny did a talk at
nice
the HHA,
yes, yes.
and he was talking about the experience of discovering a piece of art in a country house. You know, you draw the curtains and you suddenly see that there's a Dixon or a Van Dyck, whatever it might be. And the impact that has on you is completely different to the impact that it has when you go to a Van Dyck exhibition and there are 130 Van Dycks. I mean, I'm not saying it's better, I'm not saying it's worse, but it is a different experience. So I think you're absolutely right in, you know, the difference between a multiplicity of paintings. But back to Frank Brangwyn. So where did Frank Brangwyn come from? Was it your idea or was it one of your mentors?
One of my mentors. I think it came from, I think honestly it came from Peter Wakefield.
Right.
I think he was really saying to me, Brangwyn is somebody you ought to think about. Yeah. And if you want to buy a picture, there happens to be this Brangwyn coming up and so on. Yeah. But I was actually slightly ahead of him, because it's very hard to be ahead of him because he was such a nice and clever man.
And then at around the same time, was it a Craigie? Did you buy Craigie?
Craigie came up in the lift for us, and we because of the painting prize.
Right.
Because at the time, I'm sure you remember, and I do remember, there were a lot, the fashionable thing coming out of the art schools, and there are still one or two names around who I won't mention, who said painting's dead. Mm. We had all that nonsense in all the newspapers, the Sunday papers were saying painting's all finished now. It's all about constructive art, performance art. We're moving forward, everything's going to be different. Rather like you hear from other people sometimes. And I took the view that I didn't think it was all dead. And I had an advisory board. I didn't want to have a board of trustees because they can be tedious. But I had an advisory board. And again, we had no agenda, no minutes, no anything. And I said to them, I think we should introduce a painting prize in the early 90s. And one or two of them who were more knowledgeable about the press than I was said, you do realize if you introduce a painting prize, you will come into the media eye and they will criticize you because that's what they do. And I said, yes, they do, and let them do it. And so we introduced our painting prize, and as you've noted, in my walk around this morning, that it was the largest art prize in the country in the middle 90s, and Craigie won it. That's the famous occasion when he was not present to receive it, he'd round the corner.
Got you. And did it have stipulations? The reason I ask is my eldest godchild went to Glasgow School of Art, and I went to see his dip show. And it was dip, literally, it was these colossal canvases made largely of Kleenexes resting in huge troughs of engine oil. That was painting. And I wonder, did you put some conditions on your prize so that things like that couldn't be considered?
No, I don't think we did. William, you're probably quite right that we should have done, because we ran into media flack after about 7 or 8 years, they were saying, how can you compare chalk and cheese for a painting prize? Well, they were quite right. I mean, most of these works can sit comfortably with each other, but some of them are different. And there's a contemporary painter downstairs who was introduced by Laura of Clare Woods, and she is and there's a young Greek lady downstairs, Sophia, I think that's right, Sophia, and they've brought newness, but they're still painting.
Yes.
They are putting paint on a medium. In Clare Wood's case, I see from your notes down below that it's on aluminium, and I think Sophia paints big canvases, and she puts paint on canvas. But that seems to me to not matter.
No, although sometimes the scale makes a difference. I mean, some contemporary artists are working on such a scale that if you live in an ordinary house, you cannot hang the paintings.
Well, there's no market for it.
No. I mean, it's either gallery art or it's an enormous loft in Soho with white walls.
And I believe, if you like, and I don't think he'd criticise me for saying this, Damien Hurst, of great fame and infame, built his own gallery to show his own works, which he's done in South London.
Yes.
And if my reading is up to date or up to scratch, he's now doing rather large paintings rather like Hockney. We're seeing...
Yes, of Japanese blossom.
Cherry
it sounds
to you.
Completely bonkers.
Yes, cherry blossom, which has already rather passed me by. But
I don't get Damien Hurst, I have to tell you. I mean, I remember seeing The Shark and all that stuff when it first came out, and I was sort of impressed, but not filled with love.
Oh, I would join you. It's my own feeling. I don't get any pleasure out of it.
Not a lot.
And it seems to me that pleasure, unless you look at something and you have, I don't mean necessarily passion, but you should certainly have pleasure. And you should walk away from it better for looking at it than not. Well, I don't think looking at a formaldehyde cow or pig or...
Be difficult.
It's not my scene.
It'd be difficult. And then there's also the thing of repetitious looking as well. I mean, I thought The Shark was amazing, but would I have thought it was amazing if I'd seen it every day on the way down to breakfast? Maybe
no,
not.
I'd like to think you wouldn't. But look, I think he's perfectly capable of putting paint on some medium, and it may be that he will revert, because painters have reverted.
Yes,
well-known names have reverted, and they've gone abstract, and then they have gone back to being sort of recognisable art.
Well, I mean, I think that painters, artists do have to evolve, don't they? It's just impossible to keep doing exactly the same thing forever. Something that I realised fairly early on in the process, which is the life of a painter, the life of an artist, is not like what most people think it is. It's pretty tough, and it is a series of constant jugglings and manoeuvres. You know, what can I produce? When can I get it into a gallery? Can I afford to do a work on commission because I won't be able to do the work for the show? You know, it's not easy. I mean, it's not quite as bad as being on the stage, as we were talking about earlier, but it's a tough life very often.
It's recognition, isn't it? They do have problems, and I think one of the sadnesses that the art schools in their new world were telling everybody that not only do we have to teach them to draw or paint, we also have to teach them how to manage their galleries, or how they get into a gallery, how they do this, how they do that.
Listen, let me ask you some more about paintings. I have to ask you this question because it's one I ask myself. What is the one that got away for you?
That's a good question. I'd have to really take advice from others, but the one that I didn't get, I think I'd like to have probably purchased more Sickets at one stage, But then, as you've said, one's taste changes. And I suppose at the time I would like to have bought some Sickards, which I didn't get, because I thought there would be revival of interest in his work, and I liked his work. I'm trying to think what else. I haven't been allowed to buy portraits.
What, at all?
Well, no, almost not at all.
Oh.
There's always a way around things.
There's a smashing Maggie Hambling portrait in this.
Yes, of her daily, or the lady washerwoman.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of world-class painting. That,
It's a lovely painting.
So why no more portraits?
Well, I'm not sure really, looking around me, because I need, I'd like to have more portraits.
Yeah.
Because I think portraiture is a fascinating art, quite fascinating, because a good portrait is so rare. Most portraits are medium, and some are quite awful.
Yes.
Occasionally you see an outstanding portrait.
I agree, yeah.
Also with contemporary artists, let's be clear here, in my view, and every now and again you see, but I mean, I won't say what you've been looking at recently which you haven't liked, because it's so unkind to the artist.
Yes. I suppose the thing about 20th century portraits, British portraiture, is it's a bit close. I mean, if you buy a Van Dyck, for the sake of argument, it's the portrait of the sitter. The sitter is far enough away in time for it to be an art object. But if you buy a Wyndham Lewis of somebody who your parents may well have known, it's sort of too specific. You're no longer looking at it just as a piece of art. You're looking at it as, does it look like Mrs. Dorothy
I never
Watson?
really liked him anyhow.
Well, that's
I certainly don't like his painting.
You can save your money.
Have you been painted? To put a question to
I
you.
have. I was painted by Paul Brayson, and he chose to do a triptych, and I don't terribly like it, but Alison likes it, and that's the main thing. But I wanted to ask you something. You said earlier that you're not too keen on sort of technical analysis of paintings, but in the catalogue here I noticed that somebody has commented on that lovely Lowry of the barge going under the bridge, that there are little flecks of red in it which make the eye look at the whole canvas. So there is somebody is interested in the technicalities.
Well, actually, I'm going to admit I am, because I've got a painting by Paula Vézelay, and then she went to Paris in 1927 and suddenly became Paula Vézelay, because she was in with the French artists of the time. Now, I bought the painting from a gallery in St James's inevitably, and I said to Stephen Paisnell, I like this painting, it's been in your window, I've walked past it for 2 or 3 months, I would like to buy it. And I bought it, and I said thank you for letting me have it, because he did make it attractive in price terms. And I said to him, I'd quite like to die looking at that painting.
It's a compliment.
And he said, why? And I said, because I love the red flecks that I'm finding in it. And now it hangs by my bed in Shropshire, and when I get up in the morning, the first thing I see is the Paula Vézelay.
Oh,
and I
nice.
suspect it may be the last thing I'll see.
Yes, I think that's it. It's important to have something that occupies that place where you see it.
It matters.
It does matter, yeah. I want to ask you a question about where you stop. So, I said earlier that, you know, modern British art has now sort of known as 20th century British art, but of course we're not in the 20th century anymore, we're in the 21st century. Do you say to yourself, well, we're going to stop at some stage, or will it just become a contemporary art collection if it goes on long enough? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
It's a good question. It's an acute question. The answer is, at the moment, it is going on. You can only buy what you can afford, and we've never paid top dollar because we've always felt that was probably wrong, because we do other things than buy paintings, and because we're there to benefit young people of all shapes and kinds, in the arts world, I've always been reluctant to say we'll pay more than a certain level. Occasionally we creep a little bit over the top and come back. So I think at the moment we'll go on. If the world changed so much that it became a bit strange to be buying paintings, then I think we will decide that's it. But we have not made that decision at the moment.
No. I think it is quite difficult, and I think the price point, I mean, I'm aware that you've been fairly rigorous, really, in not allowing yourself to be dragged up the price scale, because, you know, all hell breaks loose, frankly, if you don't do that. But when I look back on the paintings I haven't bought, I regret not having got the checkbook out.
Are you prepared to say what they were?
Yeah.
What were they?
A little Michael Andrews.
Yes.
A little Paul Henry, very uncharacteristic Paul Henry, of a snowstorm over a lake. Those are the two that I really regret.
The pleasure for me of coming here today is certainly to meet old friends, because there are several paintings in here, in this room and downstairs, which I have not seen for a number of years. So that was a pleasure. I'm actually looking at a favourite painting, which is Christopher Wood, of the bather, probably painted in about 1928, I think. And in fact, what he's done in that painting is produce a lovely image, and yet it's not a sexual image as such, as we're now being smothered with sexuality in paintings. Yes, they can be moving, if you like, but he hasn't done that. He's put the shape in place, he's painted the figure, he's taken your eye off her to the lighthouse so that you don't just stare at her and gope. I think she's lovely. I think he's got beauty, he's got shape, he's got colour, he's got a lovely young woman. He's got her in situ with the sea, with a light, with a lighthouse which isn't a lighthouse. And I could look at it most of the time, and as it used to hang in our boardroom in Fitzroy Square, I did look at it a lot, and I always, when we entertained people or had people in, sat at the end of the room where I could look at that painting.
I'd just like to follow up that by saying I think that is a tremendous painting, and I think one of the things that's so spectacular about it is the palette, really, and the way he's got the tones and the weight of the tones just right, so that it's captivating, you know, the deep blue of the sea and that gentle flesh tone, and then the richness of the red bathing costume. There's just a way that they sing together. I mean, you know, I would mention Modigliani in the same breath, but I'm going to talk about Alfred Wallace. Alfred Wallace is on the edge of being silly. And that is why I find him so irresistible. You know, you look at one of his paintings, like the two schooners, and part of you thinks, a child could have done this. But sometimes when you look at them very closely, I think you do need to be fairly close, it's almost as though you are entering into the sea, and the sea is actually moving and the boats are actually on it. It's quite a sort of spooky experience. They're like little magic tricks almost. And then you think of him, you know, sitting there talking about his paintings in his sort of ridiculous brogue accent that nobody could understand. I don't know, I love him.
Did you meet him?
No, I didn't.
No, I never met him before my gay day, I think. But he was a sailor, wasn't he?
Yes, apparently.
He was a sailor, and I agree with you. I mean, sometimes the person who paints on bits of stuff, does Margaret Mellis paint on bits of stuff? I think she does.
Possibly.
She's
yes.
somewhat, you're saying yes to me, which I thank you for. I think she did, and I think it's right. I quite like going on a beach and picking up a stone which appeals to me, taking it home, and then forgetting where it came from. But the stones are very important.
Yes, that's interesting.
And I think with paintings, looking around me, there are all sorts of stimuli, if that's right, which you keep. And I agree with your comments about the Christopher Wood. It's also the fullness of life that he's got there.
I
that
agree.
fullness is pleasant, because you never look at that without feeling slightly better than when you didn't look at it.
Yes. I mean, the other thing to be said is that that painting and the paintings of this collection are what I call, rather arrogantly, proper art. You know, somebody has sat down and they have tried to make a work that says something about the way we live, how we live, who we are, what we think, what we feel. They're not just marks on paper, you know, and that is a wonderful thing, and that's, I think, why we love it.
That's why we should care about it.
Yes.
And we care very much about it. I'm sure you have more of an eye than I have.
I don't think so. No.
It's just a question of exercising your eye. There's a Lanyon behind me, and I remember walking around an exhibition in London when there was a Lanyon and several works by Lanyon, and there was somebody, Nicholas Goodison, who was
I know Nick.
well known, and he has a wonderful collection. And I said to him, Nicholas, tell me what's good about that Lanyon, because he collects Lanyon. And he said, actually, I quite like the Lanyons with green in them.
That's very good.
Which sort of put me in my place.
Yeah.